Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Trust's daily update from here in Glasgow at COP26. My name is Ailish Watt and I'm the Peat Policy Officer here at the Wildlife Trusts. Today is a really important day at COP26 as the spotlight is on climate justice, and it's been great to hear from prominent voices both in the leadership and from activists on the issue so far. We'll have more on climate justice soon, but for now I'll hand you over to Rob Stoneman for what's been happening at the last 24 hours during COP.
Well, good morning from a sunny Glasgow. My name's Rob Stoneman, I'm Director of Landscape Recovery at the Wildlife Trust, and I came up from Yorkshire on the train yesterday to get into the COP26 negotiations. The big action, of course, is behind the scenes, and the delegates from the countries were going through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This is quite a crucial article. This is about how we set up global trading of carbon across the countries. On the one hand, that might mean that we can get there quicker, we can incentivise green technologies, including nature-based solutions. On the other hand, you could argue that's simply offsetting, rich countries offsetting their carbon emissions to poorer countries, and that's not really what it's about. The standout speech of yesterday was from Barack Obama. Fascinating talk, really criticising Russia and China for a lack of urgency on climate action, making the point that we're not yet on track to achieve that 1.5 degrees. In fact, a lot of people saying we've got agreements at about 2.4 degrees, and there's a massive difference. You know, we had the Prime Minister of Tuvalu day before yesterday doing a very symbolic press conference from the beach, knee deep in water, making the point that the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2.5 degrees is really the end of those island nations. They'll be flooded with seawater in our lifetimes. It's really quite a scary thought. That's it from me today. I'm going to hand you over to Laura Chow from the People's Postcode Lottery.
Hello, my name is Laura Chow and I am Head of Charities at People's Postcode Lottery, which raises money for charities and good causes that aim to create a fairer, greener world. Player support helps provide opportunities to explore nature for thousands of inner city children and empowers people of all ages to help wildlife in their daily lives. In our aim to create a fairer and greener world, we agree with the Wildlife Trusts that a significant increase in the amount of land and sea that's protected for nature is needed, and hope that COP26 will deliver on ambitious commitments to get us there. I also hope that bold steps will be made to include women and girls in plans for the future. Women and girls are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change and environmental degradation. They are more likely to die than men in environmental disasters. They often have limited access to education, cannot swim, or have restrictions on mobility outside their home. And only 20% of land in the world is owned by women. Their rights to land depends on relationships with the men in their lives, and they are regularly excluded in decision-making on land and natural resources. Yet, when women hold secure rights to land, efforts to tackle climate change are more successful, and responsibilities and benefits associated with climate change response programs are more equitably distributed. So I hope that gender equality is high on the agenda as commitments are made, as gender equality is central to climate justice. And I look forward to working with our partner charities in the years ahead to contribute to a fairer, greener world.
It was great to hear from Laura there, and we're so happy to be working with the People's Postcode Lottery to further this vision. Now, unpacking the need for climate justice further, yesterday Craig visited the Office for the Alliance of Small Island States here at COP26. He also had the opportunity to talk to Rashauna Lorielle Adams from the government of Antigua and Barbuda to get her thoughts on the issue of climate justice.
Perhaps the phrase that rings loudest when you see protesters on the streets protesting about the need for much faster action on climate change is, of course, the phrase climate justice, and a phrase that's also right up there in the forefront of the youth climate movement. And it's worth just reflecting on what an incredibly important concept this is, and really what it means, because it's all about justice around climate change. It recognises that the poorest people in the world, the most marginalised people in the world, are not the people that caused the climate crisis. The people that caused the climate crisis are the rich nations that benefited from burning fossil fuels. Absolutely, of course, the UK, where the Industrial Revolution started, and yet, sadly, deeply unfairly, it's the poorest people, the most marginalised people in the world that are most deeply affected by the climate crisis. And it's hard to really come anywhere and think that this is truer than, of course, for the small island states. And that's why we've come to the office of the Alliance of Small Island States today to make this point. It was an Alliance of Small Island States in particular that at the Copenhagen climate talks and then the Paris climate talks absolutely insisted that the UN Framework on Convention on Climate Change had to adopt a 1.5 degree target rather than a 2 degree target, because the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees for a lot of these small island states is whether they exist or not, whether they continue to have their island as home or not. But it's not even just that that impact will be in that way for those islands. It's also the fact that the more marginalised, the poorer people around the world will be even further marginalised and impacted by climate change. That's the real tragedy and injustice of this. And for example, when a big weather event hits, a hurricane hits, people that are already poor end up even worse off as a result of it. And so, yes, we need to get that temperature to keep it at 1.5 degrees, but also it's only fair for us in the rich world to mobilise the finance that's needed to allow countries to overcome this and to deal with the loss and damage and the impact that climate change is already having on their lives and will continue to have in the future. And that's why it's such a tragedy and it's so wrong that the rich world have still not found the 100 billion that they promised to make sure that the poorer countries can deal with climate change. Now, obviously, island states like yourselves are particularly vulnerable to the climate crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that affects, in particular, your country?
Right. So the IPCC reports identified 6 countries, so small island development states, as particularly vulnerable to climate change. In Antigua, we have severe hurricane and tropical storms, intense droughts, sea level rise, increased air temperature, amongst others. The most severe hurricane impact we've had to date is Hurricane Irma in 2017, which we've heard a lot about. That resulted in the evacuation of an entire island. So we certainly have been on the front lines.
So the small island states were absolutely at the forefront of pushing for that target of 1.5 degrees rather than 2 degrees, and also the finance that's needed, of course, to enable this to happen. How do you feel we're moving in the negotiations on both of those issues, on the temperature target and the finance?
I mean, it's been 6 years and we're still at this stage of arguing about text rather than focusing on implementation, which Antigua has made its big focus. We're hearing a lot of political commitments and public commitments, which is great, but it would be nicer, at least for SIDS, that those commitments are turned into actual action. You know, you're putting your money where your mouth is. In terms of the UK, they have made like a few commitments. I think, as I said before, we're just interested to see how it's implemented. It's showing that more and more countries can commit to the financing that we already agreed how many years ago, ensuring that loss and damage isn't just a discussion, as it is right now a hot topic, but that it goes into some sort of commitment from countries. I think that is what I would love to see.
This is not something that's 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. This is now, and we have to act now to help with adaptation and resilience, which I know is a theme of COP26 today. And that's part of the reason why I'm so proud of the fact that the U.S. government and Joe Biden is giving the issue the attention that it deserves. His commitment to provide an additional $3 billion to extend a hand and support those who are most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, including islands, can make a difference.
As you've heard from our speakers today and from that wonderful speech from Obama, we all have a responsibility for the impact of climate change in other countries. It is absolutely critical that here in the global north, we take responsibility for our actions as individuals, businesses and governments. So that's all we have for today, but tune in tomorrow at midday to find out about the role of transport and national infrastructure in tackling the interlinked nature and climate crises.